Recording in progress.
And then your question to the audience.
Well, that's, she's saying she would like to start with a, that's fine.
That's really, it's a
She
really
knows the group.
engaging- Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a really engaging question.
And one of the things I wanted to ask, do you want to share what your aha moment was?
Yeah,
Because I love sharing mine.
I love yours.
Well, I realized that I have two because I had the one that was more like a slow burn as a girl, and it was the delegation of chores. But my real one was in class when we were learning the Constitution and all men are created equal, and the question about, does that include me?
Yeah,
And the answer was yes, because that's the British definition of men, which is human.
yeah.
I'll never forget that because it was like so not true. I thought it was true at the moment, but it sort of didn't seem exactly
Yeah.
right. You know, kids are really so smart. Well, you see that with your kids,
Too smart.
right?
I've taught them too well. They cannot be, no, they're all about equality and equity. They,
But I think children really have that innately. I mean,
they
I
do have a sense of justice.
there's a sense
Yeah.
of justice.
And when
Yes.
they perceive injustice, do not, no, don't do that.
Right.
Can't
There
hurt them.
is an innate, I think we subdue
Suppress
and
or,
yeah, we in order to adjust to society, I think we really quiet that impulse down.
makes me really think about what we're all doing here as parents or as guardians or as mentors, you know, like, are we guiding people toward some kind of conformity? We're all just trying to move together as society. I get that. But I don't want to suppress innate moral
Yeah.
goodness inside of people.
I will tell you what my father told me when I brought home my first husband, who was an Indian with a turban. And after he goes, Marcy, if you do this, I'm gonna have to disown you. And I cracked up and I said,
That's your story.
and I said, "Oh, you can't do that. We love each other too much. That's ridiculous." And then he said, "I'm only saying this for your own benefit because your life will be so hard." There's a lot of truth to what he said. And I think we really teach our young how to conform.
Out of fear.
Out of fear, out of fear. Yeah, yeah. Okay,
And this is a longer conversation.
it sure is.
And I try not to operate from a place of fear, or
Right.
at least recognize it so that. Should I start?
Sure. As soon as I find my glasses.
And you're introducing to.
Yes.
Okay. And you're introducing. Yes. You should be introducing me, Next time.
Let me just say
I'd love
hello.
to sit down. I'll just double check.
Testing. You want to test yours?
Yeah.
Hello. That's good.
Is it? I am the worst. We're gonna have a sound guy. He's gonna be here, so there's an issue. Yeah. But do we need to, is this just in fine? Just for you guys? You can, do you want to do it? Or you can test it. I did, yeah, it worked. Just, if I sit here, if it's okay. The battery goes off. Yeah, just let me know. If they say that they can't do it. You need water or anything?
I think the coffee will do
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
All right, so I'll introduce you.
Sure.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started.
So to you.
It's so nice to have everyone tune in. For those of you who came in person, we're so glad to see you. For those on Zoom, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We are really, really excited about this program. Having the ERA on the New York State ballot is very exciting and an important opportunity for women and the Elluminate community to be aware of and involved in. Elluminate is a network of Jewish women for equity and justice. We are a catalyst for gender justice and social innovation. We support the advancement of Jewish entrepreneurial women, executive leaders, and the creation of a global network of Jewish women changemakers, leaders, advocates, and philanthropists. Together, we tackle society's most pressing issues and devise solutions through a gender and Jewish lens. We also educate on emergent issues. We are thrilled to be partnering with Marcy Syms, a longtime friend and supporter of Elluminate, and board member of the ERA project at Columbia Law School Center for Gender and Sexuality Law, right? All right. It is my pleasure to organize this program with Marcy and to have the opportunity to get to know her, and Maddie, of course. And she is the original social entrepreneur. And Ting Ting Cheng, the project's director. Before I hand over the mic to Marcy, I want to give her a proper introduction. Marcy is an independent director for private and public companies and founding trustee and president of the Marcy Syms Foundation, which supports programs in education, scientific research, societal justice, and the arts. She also serves on several non-for-profit boards and is a founding advisory board member of the ERA project at Columbia Law School, which was launched in 2021. She's the past chair of the ERA Coalition, Fund for Women's Equality, which secured the 38th state ratification of the ERA amendment. Marcy is a 2022 fellow of the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative, bringing her executive leadership experience from retail and serving on the Women's Politics and Policy Board at the Harvard Kennedy School. We're looking forward to this very important discussion on passing the New York State ERA and ensuring a win for women in this state.
Thank you. Thank
Marcy?
you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. I really want to thank Maddie. Everyone in this room knows Madeline, right? Maddie is such a force, and she's been on the journey with me all these years. She's always up to date on what we're doing. And she was the one who said, it would be really great if we could tell all of the women at Illuminate about what they could do to make sure that this ballot initiative gets passed. Right? So here we are months later, and happy that you can meet Ting Ting Cheng. I'm going to let Ting Ting talk a bit about her own background, because we're going to start tonight by sharing our aha moments. The aha moment when, as a young girl, my aha moment, I think I was 7, but your aha moments when you realized that it was not fair. Something was wrong. You were not being treated equally. And we all have them. We have them at different points in our lives, and they kind of define how we respond to our world and how we adjust to that unfairness. And what the ERA can eventually do is to work its way through our legal system to find more fairness. So Ting Ting is someone who has been involved with the law and human rights her whole life. She was the lawyer for the Women's March. And we were so thrilled when we started the ERA project that Ting Ting was interested in becoming our executive director. She's now been with us for 2.5
3
years. God, we're having so much fun. I don't know. And she's amazing. And she's able to actually untangle a lot of the legal things that I find so confounding. So all that being said, I will just kick it off with a brief sharing of mine, because I had several. I'm the oldest of 6 children. I had 3 younger brothers and 2 younger sisters. And I knew from a very early age that the way tasks were given out at home were completely unfair, had nothing to do with talent, desire, skill, or anything. So I started with that basis of unfairness. But then in 3rd grade, I had an experience that probably many of you have shared. And I'm going to wait to share that because I want to hear what others say. And I might say, yes, 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 that happened to me too. So, Maddie, did you want to go first?
A friend of mine, sent in, she couldn't be here.
Can we hear it, Maddie?
Oh, yes, you can hear? I can see online over here.
Can they hear?
Do we have a mic? We do. Maybe here, just for the recording.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine submitted this. I asked her for her thoughts. Thank you. And so she said, as to an uneven playing field, for me, the most insidious elements began at home. This was true for many of us born before the women's movement gathered to its full roar. Alas, some of the most ardent enforcers of society's unfairness were our own well-meaning mothers. During elementary school, I'd begun to glean that the boy preference at home reflected a reality beyond it. My brother, like my father, would get to pursue a life of adventure, accomplishment, and meaning, while I, a girl, could only hope to achieve a vague something called happiness. What was this consolation prize, and was it at least guaranteed? Mom, will we be happy when we grow up? I asked one day. My sister and I sat on our parents' bed watching my mother get dressed. Before the mirror, she adjusted her neckline, turned, and took us in. Honey, she began, I think you'll be happy, to my sister. And to me, she said, I looked up awaiting my blessing. She said, you want too much. Still, I continued to imagine a future like my brother's and learned the word tomboy, imagining that this could be my ticket. I mentioned it to my mother that I wanted to be a tomboy, and she gave a backward glance. Tomboys aren't fat, she said. It's not that my mother was inherently mean. She wanted me to live a successful life, which in her view was being beautiful, catching a successful man, and repeating her own model of happiness, having accomplished sons and beautiful daughters.
I think we can all relate really to that. And it is interesting with mother. Oh, I don't want to stop though. Who would like to share?
Very simple action. On my brother's first, he became vice president of a steel company. And I had to wait until I was 40. So try it.
Okay.
Thank you. Funny, not funny.
I have a more sort of mundane kind of experience. I remember being in 11th grade in physics, and I noticed that my best friend forever suddenly gave the wrong answers to every question. And I knew how smart she was. We had been in class together forever. And I was lucky. I had a really wonderful teacher who asked me to stay behind and said, "You look really upset." And I said, "I don't understand. Why is Pat giving the wrong answers? I know she knows the right answers." And he said, "You know, there are some girls who think that they can't be quite as smart if they want to catch a guy." And he said, "I'm going to give you some advice. Any woman who has to do that, the guy's not worth it." And so I remembered that forever, but I also think it impacted my decision to go to a women's college.
Yeah.
So I professionally was an engineer. I worked for Bell Labs, and I was doing well and was up for a promotion. And during the performance review, which was done by all the managers, the manager told my manager that I was being too assertive. I wasn't being myself, and I was trying to be something else. And I'm sure they would never have said that for a man.
Different measurements.
Well, having grown up in financial services, I have endless stories. But outside of that, I remember how the world just perceived women differently, because in my early 40s, having divorced and having not met someone, I decided I wanted a home. And I, with a lot of effort, I bought a house, a sizable house in East Hampton. And people would say to me, "Who's in your house with you?" It's like, "Well, but it's my house." I said, "Well, you don't share it with anybody? Do you have like, do you ever share it out in the summer?" And I was like, "Well, no, it's my house." And finally, because people couldn't really understand, I said, "When I'm in my apartment in New York City, I'm alone. And when I'm in my house, I'm alone." And then they kind of sort of got it.
Hi. I certainly have many of those similar stories and bosses who have said, why would you need more money? But I do want to share, and perhaps to bring it back, in 1970, whatever, I took my mother to Albany to lobby for the ERA. And I have my mother long since gone. And I think she didn't know what to do with her only daughter. I have older brothers, but she came along, and I have a wonderful image and a beautiful photograph of the two of us. I was in high school, and I knew that's what I believed in. And she came along with me. So I feel like I had a little bit of wind at my back. So I'm really passionate about this.
Good. We need the passion, that's for sure.
I will share that my experience has been a lot of, I can share similar things, but also different in that my mom grew up and her dad told her that she had to be a teacher because all nice girls were teachers. And she is an amazing, wonderful teacher. And that was she's so happy she did it, but she didn't have the options that she wanted my sister and I to have. And so I was we went to an all-girls school where we were told that you can do anything. And it was truly an amazing experience that I'm very grateful for. And I would imagine a lot of it has to do with the work that you and your colleagues have put so much time and effort into. So I'm very grateful, but even so, I can say I still have many of these stories to share, even with that background. And that leads me to say that we have a lot more work to do. And that's why I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm an attorney, and I was recruited to a firm to become the first woman partner. Well, you can imagine, there must have been 50 men. So I became the advocate for all the women, maternity leave and things like that women need. Well, we didn't get too far, but I had a client, and the managing partner decided that I shouldn't have the client that the guy should have, and gave the client. And he said to me, if you complain, you were out. So I let him think he had won and left to become a partner at another firm, screw you. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Don't let the bad guys win. Yeah.
Let them think so that, they're
Right.
not going to take this stuff from you, so.
I work in a traditionally male field, which is construction. And I wanted to change jobs. And I interviewed with someone who I'm sure many of you know because he's quite well known. And he described the project, and I said, yeah, I can do it. It's a renovation of a pretty big building on the west side, et cetera. And he said, but it's a construction site. You'd have to wear, you can't wear those shoes like that. And he could not envision that I would be doing the project.
Yeah. So everyone's stories bring up so many different aspects over a lifetime. The one that I wanted to share that really I've never forgotten because it hit me so hard was actually in third grade when we were studying American history, and we read out loud the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And all men are created equal. And I remember raising my hand and asking Mrs. Healy if that included girls. And she didn't seem perturbed and said, well, yes, that is the British use of the word man or men, which is for human. So it's all humans. Or equal. And of course, from that day on, everything proved that she was lying. And we were not nearly at the place where all humans were treated equally. So, and I must say that when I started working at the ERA Coalition and we did some talking to Girl Scouts, and I'll never forget an 11-year-old girl who, in hearing the reading for the first time, jumped up and said, that's not fair. And if you just hold on to that feeling, we can get this done. This will get done, but you can't let go of that feeling. And you have to do it while not being angry. That's the trick. So anyway, Ting Ting, would you share yours? Because it's a little different.
I mean, I think that I have kind of two things to share that would kind of bookend this conversation. The first is that feeling. We're just talking about how kids have a really strong sense of innate justice. And when they perceive injustice, they can't let it go, So I think I was maybe 3. I'm from China. I moved here when I was 8, but within China, I think I was a really unusual person because of the communist revolution. My parents ended up meeting and procreating, but under the class system, they were never meant to do that. So my father, he comes from this quite elite family. His mother was one of the first women in China to earn a law degree in China. So she got a law degree in 1932, Shanghai. And that's where she met her husband, who, became the Supreme Court judge of Shanghai. And she didn't have a career. Nobody would hire her. Then she became a court stenographer at some point after she had all the kids. But my other grandmother, my mom's side, she grew up on a farm, didn't formally go to school. Her marriage was arranged. She ended up marrying a man that she liked in the same village, but certainly had no formal rights at all and no sense of autonomy or independence at all. Both really kind of like strong leaders in their community. So those are two grandmothers that they both really raised me and really influenced me. So I think very early on, what my environment told me was that this is not equal at all. It's a bit arbitrary. It really depends on where you were born, what circumstances you were born into, not at all about who you are as a human. And so I think very early on, I felt that innately, maybe before I learned language and I could fully articulate, what does this all mean? What are the legal, all this stuff. So fast forward many, many decades, I'm in America. I surmount a lot of different mountains. I don't know, I go to law school. I validate my parents' reason for being here. Then I do social justice law and I disappoint them, and I go to CUNY, which is a very progressive law school. All of my professors try to blow up the White House at some point. I never heard the ERA. I never heard anyone say the ERA. It was never on one syllabus in a class that I took. And I didn't take useful classes. They don't, they teach like the rights of poor people. So, and then I embark on this career, and everything I did, gender was a huge deal in international law and criminal law and immigration law, but it just was never a central thing that anyone looked at as the main issue. It was always like an appetizer issue, right? When I organized the Women's March and I saw everyone coming together, not just we all had the same plan, but there was a collective consciousness. Kind of, we all went to bed with this huge feeling, and we all woke up. We decided to kind of like operate together. It was the single most largest public protest in the world at that time.
Anyone else here went there? Yeah. So you've got a lot of participants here, Ting Ting.
Yeah, I'm getting those vibes here right now. This is a great group of people. So I had an aha moment on that stage because I thought to myself, why is this a fringe issue? Why are women the marginalized majority? I don't understand why I can't focus on this. So that's what brought me to Marcy, to be honest, is how do we practice gender justice law without breaking it apart into small morsels or single issues where they don't talk to each other? How do we connect the thread, make it a big issue for everybody? So that was another aha moment on that stage.
Thank you. That was really, like you said, bookends. Absolutely. And, everybody in this room could share other stories privately that you will go, So what we thought might be helpful, because I'm not knowing what everyone's understanding is or knowledge of the ERA, we would present some slides, make some comments about those slides, and then give you an update, really, of where we are in New York State, where we are on the federal, and what we can do when we leave this room so that we feel like we can help make this thing happen. So I think we'll start with the first slide. And really, Sue, when you said about being an engineer, I'm sorry, the engineer, we have one slide I'm going to ask you to comment about, because it's about different jobs men and women have in the United States. And it's 77% of engineers are men. So it's still.
Who's in the graduating class?
Yeah.
Who's in the MIT graduating class? I was. What percentage is it now? It was.
I don't know, but
20% when I was.
it might be getting better in the graduating class, but I don't know how much better it is in the workplace. That's where we
Mhm.
have our real
Yeah.
problem.
And with leadership.
Yeah, and the leadership. So the future of the ERA. You can take a look at the next one. This is the language that we're talking about. This is at the federal level. This is not the New York State language. This is the language that every one of the 38 states that voted on passing a constitutional amendment, this is what they voted on. They didn't vote on a deadline, which is now the cliffhanger, the expiration date. They just voted on this language. And we had 38 states, with Virginia being the last one in January of 2020. We have satisfied all of Article 5 requirements of the United States Constitution to pass this into law as an amendment. And as you can see, the amendment very carefully, it's 100 years old, this amendment, right? Alice Paul wrote it in 2023. This amendment has a section 2.
19.
I'm sorry. Right. Oh God, we need to live and be well. And we have, the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. The importance of that is that when people ask you, so what is it really going to change? What is the ERA going to do? Tell me what it's going to do. How is it going to make my life better? Every single solitary way, but it's going to take time, because that language has to work through legislation, the court system, and it will take time. We won't know how much the ERA will correct inequality in our culture, in our economy, in our legislatures for maybe 20, 30 years. It's not an overnight fix. Although, Ting Ting, maybe there are a few things that are overnight with the ERA.
Abortion, I mean, that's the big one, but that's
Okay,
that's
good.
absolutely no, that's absolutely right. The Constitution is principles. It's all of these things that we all have to agree on if we want to be an actual democracy. Then Congress gets to interpret these principles, and hope with the ERA in 2024 and beyond is that it brings a feminist interpretation to the Constitution. If we had this current Supreme Court majority interpreting the ERA, are they really going to do that much for women, for gender minorities? I don't know. They're going to have to do a dance around this language, certainly. But it's the question of like, people say, well, who needs the ERA? What is it going to do for me today or tomorrow? And it's one of those situations. It's not, it's not ask what the ERA will do for you. Ask what Congress will do for the ERA. It's the obligation is on our elected officials to realize this feminist vision, and on us to pick the right people to do that. But
and
yeah.
a perfect extension of that explanation has to do with what we'll show you later, the states that already have state ERAs. Many of them adopted these ERAs in 1972 when this was voted on by the United States Congress and passed to send out to the states. And the language is almost identical to what you read here. For instance, Florida and Texas, surprise, surprise, have state ERAs. Why is it being ignored? How come? Because there isn't the political will. The people who are making the decisions still think that they can steamroll past women's equality in the state constitution and make laws about 15-week abortion bans and all kinds of other laws that have to do with everything else that we know, like, just equality of pay and domestic violence and yada, yada. I mean, Florida and Texas are in the news all the time for trampling on women's rights. But they have state ERAs. So getting something passed, to Ting Ting's point, is the foundation to start the struggle to win. You got to get the foundational language in the Constitution. Then you can fight effectively, but you still need to fight. That's it. This is not the end of the fight. Next. Oh, this is a little hard to read here. We thought we would just give you a little bit of a timeline, if you can see. Can someone like read it? Oh, good, you have
Oh,
it
you have it
on
in
your
your.
seat. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's right.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you. Yeah, so we just put this in a slide and Ting Ting, do you want to comment about anything having to do with the 2021?
I think this, I mean, there's a lot of history and it can be very convoluted, a little bit of a Rubik's Cube, to be honest, because there's so many different rules and procedures that conflict with each other. But I think the overarching sweep of this whole thing is that we have the Constitution from 1788. Well, I'll just say this. The people who wrote that Constitution intentionally left out women, people of color, immigrants, all sorts of people, everybody in this room. That was the intent. Now we have a current Supreme Court whose job it is to interpret the Constitution, who want to take us in a time machine and go back to 1788 and interpret the Constitution according to the original meaning of the founders. So that's why it's so threatening right now. That's why, for all of the struggles that you've all experienced and that I've experienced, we're going to give the next generation of women less rights. That's why we have to push back and amend the Constitution and add explicit sex equality. It's really dire. 1920, 19th Amendment was passed. Great. You know, I think Alice Paul and all the suffrage movement people, they said this is the starting point. But immediately afterwards, they proposed something that eventually became the ERA, because they said it's all well and good that we give everyone the right to vote. We need to deliver on the promise of equality. We need some kind of promise that guarantees everything that has to do with the workplace, that has to do with education, the private and the public sector. So that was the thinking. They proposed the ERA. It sort of gets introduced to Congress for every single year for 50 years. Nothing happens. In the 70s, there's a big groundswell. Bipartisan majority support for the ERA is huge, and it does get passed in the Senate and the House in 1972. And what happens next is it gets sent to the states to be ratified, and you need 38 states. 30 states ratified the ERA within the first year of it being sent to the states. So, you know, a lot of people thought that it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're done. There was a really successful anti-ERA, kind of anti-feminist movement going on at the same time. I think it was successful because they joined up with the Christian nationalist movement, similar to how the reproductive rights anti-abortion movement grew too in this country. And then the movement stalled. The unique thing about the ERA is, unlike the first 17 amendments to the US Constitution, the ERA was proposed with a deadline attached for states to ratify, a 7-year deadline. It was mainly a compromise to get some, I guess, conservative senators to vote to pass it in Congress.
But importantly, it was not part of the body of the amendment itself. That's
And historically, it's just not a thing that's common practice. Bill of Rights, the first 17 amendments to the Constitution had no amendments. What happened was that the timeline expires, it gets extended for 3 years, it expires, and we just don't achieve the 38 states. 3 left. We're at 35. Everyone sort of gives up at that point, just following the bare kind of the meaning of the rules. What was interesting was that in 1992, a new amendment got added to the Constitution. That's the 27th Amendment right now. It's called the Madison Amendment because it was proposed by James Madison in the first Congress. Took over 200 years to ratify. No timeline. Nobody marched on Washington. Nobody challenged it in court. Nobody really was upset about this. So this made legal scholars, feminist thinkers think, wait a minute now, what is this deadline? Why do we? It was to regulate congressional pay raises in between election cycles. So who cares? Yeah, like low public policy value. But it really made people question, well, what is the legitimacy of this procedure? Like, is the deadline something that, you know, is set in stone and defeats an amendment as important as the ERA? Or is it just a recommendation? Or is it something that's reversible? If Congress can impose it, and another Congress can, you know, get rid of it. which our Congress has. The House has passed to lift the deadline twice. The Senate last term passed through a majority vote to lift the timeline, but failed to meet the filibuster threshold,
Filibuster.
which is
Yeah.
inherently anti-democratic. So this is where we're at right now. But what happened after that was it reinvigorated kind of a new renaissance of the ERA movement again. The last 3 remaining states to ratify are Nevada, Virginia, Illinois. These campaigns are led by state legislators, queer, Black women, women of color, just people that had the vision to think outside the box.
And a wonderful Republican man in Illinois, right?
Oh,
Anderson.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was state legislature, not a.
So here we are. All the constitutional rules have been satisfied. We have 38 state ratifications, congressional passage, and a current Congress that's taken action to lift these procedural barriers. Like all other amendments, every single amendment added to the Constitution have had a lot of legal issues, including the 14th Amendment, the Reconstruction era. They all had problems. But at some point, all branches of government sort of agreed, let's just treat it like it's in the Constitution and move on. Let's just apply this tool and move on, right? That's what we need to do with the ERA, to be honest. We don't have the political will. We don't have kind of the right people in the Supreme Court right now. And we have to figure out what's going to happen with Congress. But certainly we're at a moment that's been done previously with other amendments, which is we accept that this has a lot of public importance. We accept that the constitutional thresholds have been met, which are extremely high. And then we move forward and we apply it. And that takes kind of all of us to do that.
Right. Next.
So these are the kind of current efforts in Congress to remove these legal barriers.
And basically the top half, those are passed already. And don't, just to show you where it was, like we were able for the House, we were able to get the House to lift the deadline when we had a majority of Dems. We don't now, and it's strictly down party line. That's unfortunately that, you know, that 1972 to 82 bipartisan support for the equality of women in the country has really broken down, and it's very much you either have a D in front of your name or an R, or you're an independent, or you're Collins from Maine or Murkowski from Alaska, and you are known to support things that have women's rights as part of what they stand for, but otherwise it's strictly down party lines.
Murkowski and
Collins
voted
voted for it. Yes. They
One
did.
way to think about it is if we just had a different Supreme Court majority, if we had a different composition in Congress right now, today we'd be going to the courts right now, pushing the ERA to change our rights. It can happen just like that.
Right, but it's frightening. I mean, one of the things that we talk about a lot is strategizing to do something that avoids the Supreme Court, because that's where it'll go to die.
What about the archivist assignment?
That person is an administrator, and their function is to essentially rubber stamp a ratification by a state. And once you get to 38, which is the requirement in the Constitution, to finalize and publish the ERA. What's really interesting is that when Illinois and Nevada became the 37th and 36th states to ratify, at the time, the archivist was a man. He did certify their ratifications after the deadline. I think at that time, nobody thought that we could achieve a 38th state, but Marcy did. And then and remember, Virginia tried, and that first term failed by 1 vote. And then
we
essentially flipped the whole, for the first time, and voted to approve. And by that point, that was the Trump administration then came in and wrote that damaging memo saying, well, the ERA is dead anyway, so you can't do anything about that.
Bill Barr.
So, I mean, we
Oh, I
can.
just have to say one, I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
Bill Barr, 38 states, 38 pages for his opinion. I don't know about anyone else who heard that and went that, but that was for spite.
But what does getting 39 states do?
I think it's important to get 50 states. One of the things that we're working on at the ERA project is to come up with a national strategy. Because to Marcy's earlier point about how there's one federal ERA, there's one constitution, one ERA. There's some legal questions. We're working on it. We're close. And then there are 50 state constitutions. And there are 29 state ERAs that are not in dispute. They're at play. They can be interpreted in really expansive feminist ways. The way that they're interpreted, the ways in which hearings are held to talk about the meaning of that will influence the interpretation of the federal ERA moving forward. So we're kind of setting things up right now. What does that mean for? This means that we want to get to 50 state ratifications because we can all agree that equality is essential. And this also means that we can get to 50 state constitutional ERAs too. So I think that those two kind of parallel movements have to happen at the same time. That's something that we're thinking a lot about. There's certain states, I know this is kind of getting in the weeds, like I made a grid for everyone because it's such a, but so there are basically 9 states that have not ratified the federal ERA and that don't have a state level ERA. You can imagine what they are: Arizona, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. It would be great to go to those states and say, let's do both at the same time. Let's work up a coalition on the ground to ratify the federal ERA, and let's add some new and important language into your state constitution at the same time. Do a parallel strategy.
This is a far-reaching kind of taking more of a 30,000 in the helicopter view of how resources and efforts can be spent so that in the long game, we're in a better place 10 years from now. Because that one of the little girls, she said to me, well, when are we going to have at the Girl Scouts? Well, when are we going to have it that women are in there too? And I said, I think I scared her. I said, I hope before I die. And I meant it. I mean, that was, I think it was like 2014 or something. And I still feel that way. I hope before I die. Yeah.
What's the strategy if the Senate fails to lift the time?
Yeah.
One is to remove the filibuster, but then you have to live with the consequences.
Fails to lift the time limit. Because if you have 50 states that were to approve it, and you still have a Senate that refuses to lift the time limit, you don't have any ERA.
So last year, the Senate achieved a majority vote to lift the time limit, which is so hard to do. I think it's important to take that majority vote and to interpret that as a success, as a successful congressional action. That's what I mean. Because it's really hard to hit that filibuster threshold. But if you had the House lifting the time limit and the Senate through a majority vote lifting the time limit, that's basically, that's a majority support for the ERA.
It just put the time.
It doesn't because of the filibuster.
Yeah.
But
At that point, it's
if you
moved.
succeed at the House and it passes, you succeed at the House and it passes, and you've already passed at the Senate. Does it matter that they're out of sequence, like they're not at the same time?
So the same year, the same calendar year for the.
You can make some good legal arguments that they don't need to be in the same session.
If you go to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there are examples. I mean, you can
Right.
yeah, don't go to the Supreme Court.
Right. It's almost like you've got quicksand, any maneuver you make. I think, see, that's why so much of taking a look at not only the states that have passed it and what state actions have been taken to protect women, states that have the ERA, and take a look at the world and where the world, there are so many countries in the world that say the words and don't have any actions of protection for women or girls. I mean, it's everywhere, because it really has so much to do with who gets elected, who's in power, who's in office, and how strongly is the organization of women on the issue of their own rights. We do get pulled into so many worthwhile causes, and we sometimes make our own freedoms and rights secondary to those other causes. At least that's my observation.
And we really are a global outlier. We're the only democracy in the world without explicit sex equality in our constitution. And we have the oldest constitution in the world. Sometimes we advise new democracies on writing their constitutions, and we advise them to add sex equality.
So here are
So-
some of the things I just wanted to, and then you could, I just wanted to point out that we did list some of the things, the kind of the most obvious things that we.
I think these are, yeah, I mean, these are really big kind of systems change framing. I think you framed a lot of these. One interesting thing to note is that last week the Supreme Court handed down a pretty important decision called Rahimi, which had to do with essentially a man who threatened his partner with a gun, and whether his Second Amendment rights to bear arms are violated when a domestic order takes away his ability to own the gun. So this is the thing, is with the Second Amendment in the Constitution, he gets to bring a case asserting his rights. This case is solely, I mean, it's very offensive, but it's solely about his rights to own a gun under any circumstances, even when he has a criminal order against him for clearly being violent against society. But does he still have a clear Second Amendment right to own a gun? Luckily, the Supreme Court didn't completely mess things up, but we don't have a right in the Constitution that allows us to center our story and to bring rights. So if you read that case, it's purely about him and purely about his relationship to his gun, not really about the other people who his violence has harmed, right? The Constitution doesn't acknowledge other people other than him under his Second Amendment rights. That's why we need the ERA.
So I'm still stunned by the fact that Florida and Texas have passed a state ERA, but it does make me question, like, what is the teeth of passing the ERA if they have an amendment and it's not making a difference.
That's right. And it's not making a difference because I don't know, since most of the state ERAs were passed in the 70s. Many of the women, just like young women today, don't know about the fact that they're not protected under the law. As a woman, you have no protection under the law unless it has been somehow handed down on a particular issue by a particular judge over particular precedents. But we don't have an argument that says we rightfully are equal under the law and start from there. In those states, those women don't even know they have. And there again comes back to political will. Political will. No one hands you anything. We say often there's no free lunch. There's no freedom either without the effort, the hard work, the knowledge, the struggle, the input, the vigilance, the resilience, the creativity, and the sacrifice.
I have to say the state ERAs, a lot of them were passed. Some of them are quite old, like Utah has a very old one. I think it has to do with polygamy, but a lot of them were passed as a part of the wave in the 70s, a part of the federal ERA wave. And they were seen as symbolic acts, sort of like, that's the end goal. Change your constitution, hooray, we do a victory lap and then we're done. there was a study done by some professors, and essentially none of them were used properly. They're not seen as actual tools. And I think the reproductive rights movement right now, like the issues coming up in that movement, shows me how we need to be thinking differently about how the ERA gets used as a tool. Meaning, even if we had the most robust, the most pristine abortion protection in your constitution, the language itself doesn't do anything because it's all about access. If you have beautiful protections on paper and you don't deliver that to people, they don't have access to that right. And you really see that in the abortion context is people who don't have the resources to pay for an abortion, go to a place where they can access it, take time off. They essentially don't have the right to abortion, even if they live in a state that guarantees it. Same thing with the ERA. You can amend the Constitution with an ERA, but if you don't build the scaffolding to actually think about equality, assess equality, then it's really just symbolic and kind of meaningless. And one of the things that we're doing right now is we're going to very soon, I will share it with all of you, launching a model policy agenda. So a set of recommendations for state level executives and legislators who have state ERAs to think differently about how to pick it up as a tool and to use it and to essentially create a gendered lens onto everything they do.
And that on the last one, accountability is built into the very framework of our institutions. Only then is we will have a moment of maybe exhaling and, you can relax for a second, just a second. But until that's achieved, there is no exhaling and there is no relaxation. Let's go to the next one. Okay, I just, we just want to look, you were talking about pay. And so the US ranks 53rd in the world. Now, I think under the Biden administration and the last 4 years, there have been improvements and we're now number 43.
But still.
43. We're 43rd amongst all of these countries in our relationship between what a man or woman makes. And we can go to the next slide. And here it's broken down by groups. And we can see to the 100 cents to the Asian woman, 87, white women, 70. So, people say, why hasn't it happened? There it is. That's a big, big reason why it hasn't happened. Ka-ching. Ka-ching.
Floating out there that are competition?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are there any other amendments waiting?
There are, I mean, there's a really strong opposition. I think what I see at the state level is, it's a political dialogue. In Pennsylvania, we got the Supreme Court, we participated in this case, submitted an amicus brief, but we got the Supreme Court to essentially interpret their state ERA to possibly mean that the state's Medicaid funding should be applied for abortion for people who can't afford it. And that's been something that's been a barrier in the state because of an older case that was handed down in the 80s, sort of saying that abortion rights is not a sex equality issue, also not an ERA issue. That state is a very old ERA, passed about 50 years ago. So this happened recently, which is really exciting.
But you asked the question a little differently, I think.
I did. It was much more the sense of, okay, the ERA is one amendment we're hoping to get passed in New York State as well as federally. Are there any other type of amendments out there that are floating there that the world is hoping to pass?
No.
Because with the rightward swing, the world, not just what we're seeing here in our country, the world is slowly moving right.
Moving to the right.
That much more difficult, I think.
I think it's just really hard to change the Constitution. A lot of scholars have said that it's basically calcified. It's really hard. If we were to try to add the words America is a democracy to our Constitution, I think it would fail. It's incredibly hard. It's a double supermajority. And if there are any legal questions, it will go to the Senate, and then there's a third supermajority with a filibuster. It's very, very hard to do. My point with Pennsylvania is that I see the opposition very robustly doing their work at the state level, because in response to this Pennsylvania Supreme Court case that said now Medicaid should be used toward funding abortion, now what I see people is they're trying to amend their state constitution to add a ban on Medicaid funding to their constitutional language in direct response to that.
So let's move on, because I know we have a couple more. I just want to make sure we cover a couple more of these slides, because this one I think is very powerful and a bit of a surprise. As we look at our wonderful capitalist society that has competition and the meritocracy, sure. And here's, regardless of how many women are in the graduate schools and paying for their higher education, we know the dropout rate when we get to middle management. But here's broken out by category, the percentage of men and percentage of women. And we take a look at computing, where I think it's only 14% of the jobs, which that being said, I mean, if you really want to get into a nightmarish scenario, which I don't, I got enough trouble on the ground, is AI and computing and what's going on. And is there any woman in the room? 14%. So this is a, and the discussion also comes down to, do you change society first, or do you change the laws first? And, the chicken or egg kind of thing, mostly, you change the laws first. Think about taxation. We change the laws and their business follows. We change the laws about how things can be legally structured and their business follows. The same thing happens in culture. And unless I think we have the movement socially. I think we have the societal change where women, we expect to be treated equally. Our laws have not caught up with the realities that we live or pursue, and we're the lucky ones. Oh, next slide. Oh, this one's a hoot. So we are the land of family and motherhood. And meanwhile, you don't get a day off once you're a mother, unless you work for a company who recognizes that. But as a culture, as a society, the law has not put aside any time for you to bond with your infant. No employer has to give you 5 minutes. Next slide. And this is what we were talking about, the number of states that have passed and are pending. And you see New York, and New York is this November, finally. It is going to be on the back of the ballot. So you got to flip it. We were trying to think of like a sexy logo, flip it, or, or something that, I don't know, something that catches on. Because people, they're going to get their ballot, and if they don't turn it over, they're not going to see that there is a vote for the state ERA. Look at the backside. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we got to get something going there. They're still working on the language for how the the language in the ballot will be, how this is going to be articulated. I hope it's going to be simple, straightforward, and easy to understand, so that people know exactly what they're voting for. And, it isn't one of those vote yes to vote no kind of things. Yeah. And Ting Ting, fortunately, has some access to some of that. There's a committee now. It's not in the state legislature. It's actually a committee that is working on the language.
And they're going to release it the day after July 4th. So it's going to be kind of a doozy. And then there's going to be a 15-day calendar day public comment period. So once we have it, we'll circulate it, and then we can also circulate directions to how to kind of,
Because it can be
Respond.
altered.
Yeah.
It doesn't get mailed out. The first mailing goes to the military. And that's not until October. So we have some time to make adjustments once it comes out.
Do we need to go to Albany at all for this?
I don't think so.
Except, yeah.
I don't think they go to Albany for this.
It's gone on Zoom.
Okay,
So this is just the breakdown of state
Yeah.
ERAs.
yeah.
It's now 5 states. Now I know that we can add Ohio to that mix.
So New York, Vermont, Minnesota, Maine, and Ohio. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And these are the states that are actively amending their state constitutions. And also Nevada amended their state constitution with an ERA in 2022. These are modern ERAs, I'd like to call them. They're much more expansive. So going back to that first slide of the ERA first proposed, passed by Congress, rights cannot be denied or abridged based on sex. These are very expansive beyond gender itself. So defining sex in a really broad way to include gender identity, gender expression, orientation, but also race, religion, national origin, disability, a broader category, recognizing that all of these different issues are related to each other and gender isn't a single issue topic.
And one of the things that the right jumps on with this kind of expanded is to make it seem like we're talking about 50% of the population. I mean, how can you give transgender people their rights? There are so many of them. No, there aren't. And why would we disregard the equal rights of all women as a group because we chisel out this small percentage of the population? And that's their red flag. That's that's what they march towards. This fear tactic that, somehow by having an ERA, your daughter's going to become a guy. It's irrational, but those are the emotional ways in which they fight against equality. Next one. And we just put this in here because it's just so nice, and we can actually send you a copy of this. It was just Ruth Bader Ginsburg from 1975, and she's been also a champion of the right now because she's had, unfortunately, in that later interview, had the terrible quote where she said if she had it to do, she would start from scratch because there were so many issues. And that's not what she meant in that way. She basically always stuck to, if there was one amendment that the Constitution would have in order to better our society, it's the ERA. That's what she believed. That's what she really believed. Would it be nice just to have a new ERA that didn't have an expiration date on it? Sure. But that's not what we have. And we don't want that because that'll be another 100 years. And I think,
That's her quote, but sorry.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. There's an amendment to add to the Constitution. Yeah. So I think, but yes.
Echo Sue's comment. I'd like to know how I could, if I was a Texan. If I was a Texan, how could I have an anti-abortion laws and equal rights amendment? There's something wrong. They don't.
Right.
There's no action.
That's right. That's right.
They don't see the abortion issue as a gender issue.
It's a right to life issue. It's a murder issue. They don't see it. They don't, you know, that's the argument. That's the problem. They're not defining it as a gender issue, and that's how they can justify having both of those positions. I don't necessarily agree with that,
Right.
but
And-
that's the structure of the argument.
Right. And interestingly enough, if you just peel that argument, just the first layer of it, it's an economic issue, because any woman who has a child, as I'm sure everyone in this room understands, their economic reality changes immediately. And if you're a single parent, your life is never the same. So they're using the right to life, or the, I mean, I see it as not having separation of church and state, because as a Jew, I don't think abortion's illegal. It does nothing against my religion. So I think the whole thing is false, and it's just to keep women down.
Why is some proponents of the national ERA using the argument that if there was an ERA, that abortion would be taken care of because women were in the are in the Constitution? That's an argument that's
Yes.
being made, but I guess saying that in Texas and Florida, they have the rights, it's in their Constitution,
It's in their
but
state constitution. Yep.
and the New York amendment is quite broad, isn't it? It has
Yes.
much more than the,
It addresses the reproductive rights,
yeah.
the
but
New
it
York
goes beyond.
Amendment, and it also protects a variety of groups that were not specifically protected. So it's quite different than the ones that are in Florida and Texas, where they basically have what the federal language is, which is can't prejudice on the basis of sex, right? And that argument in and of itself would be enough if the women of those states organized.
Yeah.
And if they got attorney generals who had, you know, D's next to their name and that were for that issue, they could get something done. They could.
If I
Yeah.
could, I would just suggest, I think for myself, period. All of a sudden, I see ERA in front of me all over the place. It was like nowhere, and then it's everywhere. So somehow,
Wait, is that since you got the invitation?
somehow the message isn't getting out.
Oh, for sure.
What do you want us to do? How can we help?
Wow. Not getting the message out. Let me tell you, every single time we've done something in Washington over the years, there's no coverage. There is absolutely no coverage. There's no, if you don't have your own established social media network or techniques or platform, there is the media, the general media in this country does not cover this issue, period, over and out. They don't. They haven't since the start of the ERA coalition. I mean, it doesn't get covered. I do think that there's an opportunity with the state, that there's more with local news and with social networking with people that live in New York. I think that can have a groundswell. So talk about it. Tell people that you know, every contact you have. I went to this meeting tonight. It was about the New York State ERA. We have to vote. It's so important for our protection. And, you know, just get people to have it so that they hear those three letters, the Equal Rights Amendment, and they'll be more receptive then to the federal. And that was kind of what the thinking was as we looked at what can we do in this moment? We don't want things to go to the Supreme Court. What can we do? So maybe we can do states. And with the groundswell in states, and it's more personal, it seems more immediate. And because we have it in November, there's a real timeline here. You know, you only have 5 months to get this right.
Is
Yeah.
there a script that we could use as a basis for an email or for whatever to send out to all of our friends? I mean, I know lots
Huh.
of people. and
Okay.
If I had something that I could.
We're going to send you a script.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. This is a great note to end on.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you so much, Ting Ting and Marcy, because
Yeah.
I think we're just getting a taste of the work that we all need to do until November. And we want to thank you for your leadership in getting the ERA back on the ballot and to educate us and remind us of the real importance of this work. I know for me, I was a child and my mom was a photographer, and we have all the pictures from Albany when the when the ERA amendment was, being put forth. And it's hard to believe it's taken all these years, but it's up to us to pass it, and we should be a model for the country. So at Elluminate, we are really willing to continue to share the information with our community and see how we can be helpful and help make this pass.
And maybe I want to thank everyone who's on Zoom for being tolerant. I know it was a hard program to probably follow on Zoom, so thanks for hanging in there. And if we get some talking points to you, can the Zoom folks?
Absolutely.
get to?
Absolutely. We'll share it with everyone who is here and with our network
And
at large.
lastly, I
Mhm.
did provide, everyone got the card?
Yes. Oh, well,
Everyone got a card.
it's on your seat.
It's
And
on your
for those who
seat.
are on Zoom, we will send it to you by email.
And you want
Mhm.
more information about the work that we're doing, past programs that we've done, legal work that we're involved in at the ERA project, just use the code on the back and it will be there for you.
And one more thing, talk to your daughters, your granddaughters, your
Yeah.
nieces and nephews. We need the younger generation. They're the voting generation to see this as a priority issue as well and to get out the vote.
There's QR codes in the brochure as well that I think would bring you to lots of cool places down a deep ERA portal. And just to add to that, young people are really activated by this issue. So people in high school and college, and certainly when I speak to law students, everybody wants to get involved. And I would say that we're sort of the central clearinghouse for younger people that want to get plugged in. While
We were at Seneca Falls for the 100th anniversary. And we had Generation Ratify, and they're all in their 20s and,
That's awesome.
teens. It was great.
yeah, so
I was at a birthday party and I mentioned this briefing, and there were 4 other women there who are very educated and of a certain age. And 201, they were shocked that New York State doesn't have an ERA.
That's
They
right.
didn't know this issue was up for, to be voted on. They just assumed that, it was in the US Constitution. So just mentioning it and enlightening people on really where we are, I think is part of the battle.
It is. It really is. Information, depending on the media, it's kind of like, what did someone say when we were, after the impeachments and the trial and the 34 and it was Rachel Maddow. And Rachel Maddow said, no one's going to save us. We have to save ourselves.
That's right. So we hope on November 21st at our convening that we're celebrating with both of you on the passage of the ERA.
Yeah.
yes.
C-SPAN covered the hearings.